I think it was a couple of weeks ago, I responded to Richard. He was talking about spots on the apple, and when I reviewed his comments, I realized I'd actually, and actually got back to me, but I realized I had actually missed an opportunity to make a really good point and to actually closer to what he was actually asking about. But I wanted to say one thing. I really appreciate this, Richard, that you wrote back to me later, and you said, the more I listen to your reply to this question, the more I get from the concepts you present. So that's one of the things about what we're doing here. And what I'm really wanting to do is there's some very key concepts to being a really good painter. And concepts is exactly the right word for them. So each time you're listening to me, you aren't listening to me, well, how you do this and how you do that. It's really the underlying concepts, like relational seeing. That's just a classic underlying concept. But if you can keep your eye on that, you'll have more fun with what I'm doing. So let me, but then he said, you've more than adequately answered my question and given a bit more to think about as usual. And thanks, Richard, I appreciate that. Now I'm going to follow up though, okay? Because you made a longer, more extended thing, which I think is hugely valid, and it just gets me on track. And that's what I was hoping people could do whenever I go off in a direction that may not be precisely what they're asking. Man, go after me. Send it back. Send me something and say, could you, but this, and so let me give you the question. I'm going to go ahead and read it in this case. If I haven't lost it now. Richard, where are you? There you are. So my comment from Sargent about spots is from the book Sargent by Evan Charteris. Must read, by the way. Not every part of that book is something you want to read, but there are enough chapters, including 2 eyewitnesses to his demonstrations, that you would need, if you had not read them, you want to have read them. You want to have seen what people have said. One of the problems with eyewitnesses, of course, is that they can misread. This book came out late enough, it was well after Sargent's death, so he didn't have a chance to have input about what they said. But students do frequently miss. But this looks pretty, what you see in the Charteris book looks, in both cases, but particularly the woman who's relating what she saw, they come across as entirely plausible. There's some beautiful stuff that she says too that's also really true of what we're doing. I believe there's one point where she says, and it just looked like he turned on the lights. Well, that's pretty big. And once you get into the Boston School way of thinking, it's a significant thing for us to be able to compare with. Let me give you this now more fully. Sargent's comment to a student regarding painting a portrait was, don't concentrate so much on the features. They're only like spots on an apple. Paint the head. So Richard says, I was thinking about the idea of not looking into the areas of the painting as one works, so as not to see more detail. So that's different from what I was asking. To not see more detail than can be seen when looking at the whole. I'm going to come back and read that passage again and talk about it. The ensemble, that's the thing as a whole, the ensemble, as R.E.M. Stevenson calls it, and differences in the appearance of color in an area when one looks at it with a wide or narrow focus. Man, there's so many good points in here. But so sort of like the difference between a floodlight and spotlight, or paint the head, is that a head or is that a collection of features? I think that also maybe from that, is that a head or a collection of features? So in the studio this week, and in an ongoing way generally, we have portrait painting going on in my studios, my teaching studios. And it's probably the most difficult thing to do, to try to get people not to just run after every little thing they see. Can you draw an eye? Can you draw a nose? And it's all these personal challenges. And you probably have to go through a lot of that. Gamble used to say, well, he doesn't have any idea why does the neophyte works from the details, from the parts, works so little. But of course you have to have parts to make the whole. And yet people still, they begin to believe, as we as students begin to believe, that the parts make the whole. Now, in a way of saying that's true, but in reality, the whole is not the sum of the parts, oddly. If you haven't preconceived the whole, the parts won't actually do the job. So there has to be a preconception of the whole, the ensemble, right? So the head taken as an ensemble, first thing you notice is that it's an egg. I remember when I was a young student, I think I may have mentioned this previously, but it's really true. Perugino, I used to say to myself, I was looking at Perugino and Raphael because I thought they were, at least Raphael was this god. And I said, look, they seem to be stuck on the egg they just paint an egg and call it a head and then throw a couple eyes on it and that sort of thing. And, it's almost that interesting, or that simplistic. And I found, I had a certain sense of disbelief that was plausible until I saw, in my girl watching days at the high school as a student, watching three young women walking toward me, but they were more than a half a block away, and they were just, they had a nice gait, they had nice color, nice hair, nice clothes, and there were three eggs walking toward me. I mean, it was like plain as day. There were three eggs. You could see them from that distance. I couldn't with my eyes see the features. Well, and so what you will frequently do then is you'll start zooming in to see the features that you can't see, and you immediately bypass something even bigger, right? So when Sargent says paint the head, it reminds me of the Gravely story as well, that when he was demonstrating at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, Gravely is a sculptor who was a great portrait sculptor, maybe the greatest American portrait sculptor. That's an interesting question, but I bet he is. I don't know who I'd hold up again, as is better. But they said he was doing a demonstration for them, the model sitting there, and he's got his mass of mud going on. And they said he was going on and on for some period of time, and the students started getting nervous. It just looked like he was lost, and it looked like he knew what he was doing. He said, and then all of a sudden, he set on this and he set on that, meaning a nose or some other aspect of the form that actually stands out. And suddenly you saw the whole thing come to life in just a second or two. And the same thing comes across when you're talking about Sargent and the light at the end when that demonstration happens. But but he makes a couple other really interesting points. And but the idea, for example, in the Impressionist world, before I get back to his points, the idea that I try to get across to students sitting there in the classroom is that you have to have the likeness of the color of the person. And so it's not really the best way to think about it, the way I phrased it. It's not the likeness of the color of the person. It's the likeness of the color ensemble in front of your eyes. And if you're painting a portrait, if the color of that person isn't right in the ensemble, in the milieu of notes, the background, what the person is wearing also, if that person's color isn't that person, then you've already missed your first target, right? It's a portrait of the color of that person, so shall we say. And it's very difficult for people who don't paint impressionistically to understand that it is not all drawing, especially people who work with formulas, and they just give you the formula for the portrait, I would paint everybody this way, it'll all come out okay. There's something about that doesn't embody the Boston School search for the beauty. In this case, the beauty of the sitter before you. And so, the whole idea of let's put down a likeness of the color. Let's get at the likeness of the color. And then, if you want to say, of the person. Now, isn't that an interesting thing? But then it's also true, let's get a likeness of the form, and you mean the great forms. Much like the great gesture or the great tilt of the head is more important than the tilt of a nose or an eye or something like that. If you can do that, if you can grasp that, and that is grasped very much in the great forms of the skulls. Somebody was doing one today. They were working from 2 days ago from a sculpture that I did as a student, and they thought in some way worthy. And it isn't a bad job, but it was noticeable that they were doing a lot of things, and they'd missed the overall proportion and gesture of that mass that was set up by the silhouetting edge on this side and whatever's happening on the other side, including the bony corner of the shadow line. And but that's the idea, though, that larger content, the relationships to the whole visual ensemble, the relationships of the parts of the face to the entire visual ensemble of just the head. So what we find, though, is that people then, you work with objects, eyes, literally drawing eyes, and you don't ever have the opportunity to explore the relationships of the values between the eyes as a preconceived, not a preconceived, but in the Ang sense of that word, preconceived, pre-seen, pre-observed set of color values. So as the Boston School would do it, they would set up spots. You get this larger thing going in and set spots and have a look at the spots and distribution of the spots, colors of the spots, values of the spots, and gradually bring them to articulation in a systematic way, in a very systematic way, by the way. Which is rare, it's way easier to talk about than it is to do. Maybe I should say it the other way around. It's way easier to do once you're experienced than it is to talk about and try to get across how simple, in a sense, the method is. By the way, the Boston School method is simple because it's only one thing. You're always doing only one thing. I'm going to leave it at that, okay? In other ways, you're doing a lot of different things. First you're doing this, and then you're doing that. But in the Boston School way of working, you're only doing one thing all the time. I refer to it as like a fractal approach to painting. You know, the fractal is the idea you have a big paisley, and the paisley shape is made out of little paisleys. The whole pattern is made out of little teeny paisleys, right, all around, making the shape. And each little paisley is made out of little paisleys going all around the little paisleys. Paisley, paisley, paisley. Paisley is a shape. If anybody doesn't know it, it's the shape, sort of an interesting S-shape. It's a pattern that's created for decorative purposes. Anyway, that's why it's described in a book on fractals. You could look at which location, I have no idea, but it's still an interesting idea. I probably steal these badly, but I'm talking about it the way I read it. I'm not a scientist and don't really have much glue, Velcro for the sciences, except in the arts. So let's see if I can finish up. I know I've gone too long already on this one. So he talks about not looking into areas of the painting, but seeing how things look when you're not looking at them. That sort of thing is huge for what we do, and I'm completely on board with him saying that. But the idea that I was thinking about, the idea of not looking into areas of the painting as one work so as not to see more detail than can be seen when looking at the whole. Well, in reality, though, you're painting an area, and you actually have to paint the look of the area as it looks while you're seeing the whole. So it's not that you're staying away from these places. You need them to be what they are and get into sync with other guys who are being what they are as well, right? So I say that, being cautious not to suggest that what we think is that you can just put in vagueness. And yet he does say it right. He says more detail. So in fact, I like that word detail in the sense that I don't think detail means little things. It means important things that are small. So otherwise you shouldn't even include it in the painting the way I think about it. So I may have really gone wandering here in a way that may not be helpful, but get back to me, anybody who wants to. I'm looking to see if there's anything I might have missed. And you can see, if you look out of the corner of your eye, if you look focally at everything, you won't see the color well. So you're always trying to get your eye to be all over the place. Keep your eye a little wobbly, a little moving, so you can see the quality of the color. The cones are out on the outer edge of your eye. I suggest you look at Lindsay Harkness's article, and I intend to link it to my stuff one of these days really soon. But Lindsay was a student of mine who had first was a doctoral degree student from Oxford, studying the eye of animals, zoology major. So, and really a well-commended thing that you can actually find referred to online by some individuals. But that's a good place to also look when you're trying to understand the difference between the foveal part of your eye, the zooming in part, and the other part. De Camp would say, look at the thing as a whole. Keep your eye on the picture plane. Don't let it go past the picture plane. So you're always looking at the stuff this way as they relate this way. And you don't go in there and try to buy things and own things. Very interesting other discussions. I've gone way long. Subscribe, share, like, all the rest. And thank you again. See you next time.